So just a quick warning that I'm quite ill, so I'm quite groggy, and I wrote myself a script, but the printer at work doesn't work, so I might get lost. Anyway, yeah, so Junior's Guide to Changing the World. So as a junior developer, I've been faced by a really surprising number of challenges in a very short space of time. For example, I've experienced internal politics, lack of organization, elitism, gross ineptitude, intellectual waste. I've even seen disabilities being used as both a threat and an accusation. Now, this all sounds really horrible, and you're probably wondering why you signed up to listen to this instead of just going and watching Jeremy Kyle. But I've never had all of this at one time, and I've also had other amazing balancing factors. So I've had the privilege of working in incredibly stimulating environments with driven, honest teams in companies that really care deeply and passionately about what they do and about their clients. I've really loved the organizations I've worked in, and I'm proud of the practices I've been part of, whether that's been being part of incredible execution of agile methodologies, or being able to use cutting-edge technologies, or even helping to redefine modern tech education. So, for this talk, I've tried to pin down my tips for starting a conversation when you want to change your work environment, whether that is solving problems or working towards promotions. So, number one, don't make it personal. Don't extrapolate information wherever possible. Personal attacks immediately invalidate any legitimate points you're trying to make, even if the listener agrees with you. In contrast, the professionalism of concise, relevant points will always reassure your listener that not only are you not running some kind of personal vendetta or crusade, but it will also add weight to your arguments. So, be like a Boy Scout. Know what outcome you want, and don't get caught out by predictable questions. Think in advance about what they're going to ask you and come up with sensible, reasoned arguments. 5 minutes after any meeting, I tend to remember the solution that I wanted to suggest, or, I don't know, some amazing example of something that happened. But please do as I say, not as I do. Don't be me. So, yeah, and if something comes up that you're not prepared for, then don't be afraid to ask for more time to consider what your response is. So, number 3, this is really important. Be selective who you talk to or involve. Whether you're having issues with your team or your workflow, or you want to change the lighting in the office, the situation might morph when other people get involved, and, it becomes a case of Chinese whispers, which no one likes. And then the other risk is that you might just waste your time talking to someone who can't do anything, and they say, yeah, so just go tell all of this stuff to someone else, which, depending on your priorities, might be a really big deal. Lost my place. I did mention small. And make sure that you consider factors like who you can trust and who you can depend upon most. So, every time I find a problem, which sounds like a lot from this talk, but I promise it isn't, I try to weigh up why it was originally a good thing. So, for instance, you get an employer who really cares about giving their client good value for money, but then they cut out planning time in favor of development time, and I'm sure that we've all seen how that goes. Or you might get someone who decides to refactor a really legacy file, and then they accidentally wipe out some really obscure compatibility fixes. Upside down. Highlighting how you can push someone towards their own goal is the best way of making someone receptive to what you're saying, especially if it's a really delicate personal issue. Next, think of it like stealing icing off a cake. When proposing or introducing change to your environment, whether that's reorganizing the office stationery or tackling discrimination in the workplace, it's way easier if it's something small enough that no one really notices until it's too late. Not until it's too late, but no one really notices. So my way of retaining a sense of control is writing down from the beginning everything that I want to achieve, and then working through that list methodically in bite-sized chunks. And often something that you tackle further up the list will solve something without you even trying later on. So yeah, be open to a different outcome from the one you expected. Whoever you speak to may know information you don't, so they are extremely likely to suggest something that you just never knew was a thing. It's important not to reject these things before you've listened to them, and not to give up on asking for help in the first place because you don't think there are any options. But when it comes to compromising on an outcome, it's really important to decide, you and your listener, whether that's a stepping stone or your end goal, and then if it is either of them, deciding how you'll reassess and evaluate whether or not that's worked afterwards. People often prioritize security over mental health or stability over dreams. I've heard loads of people say stuff like, it's not that bad, I'll just deal with it. But that's not great. So my thoughts on this boil down to two things. One, start that conversation. The worst that can happen is that nothing will change. Two, if you started that conversation and it didn't work out, or you left it too late to have that conversation at all, then don't be afraid to walk away. Extract yourself from the situation in whatever way is most appropriate, whether that's ignoring someone's jibes or giving up on upgrading the company image, or even moving to a new company that aligns more with your personal priorities. Figure out what you need and take the path that will take you towards it. So, all of this stuff that I've said is great, but it actually takes quite a lot of courage, and I really hate confrontation, so this kind of thing is really hard for me. And on top of this, I'm particularly weak on being strategic. I'm only 19, so I haven't had a lot of experience with political correctness and things like that, and people having their own personal agendas. In cases like this, there's an antidote, which is often finding a friend. So whether this is in the form of your best friend, an external mentor, or someone who's in this situation with you, being able to hash out any problems, any strategy that you're having, or rehearsing for meetings, or just offloading is really, really invaluable. So, to summarize my tips, don't be apathetic, because you can use your voice to change your life, and it only takes a conversation. And pick your battles, but don't be afraid to walk away if it gets too hairy. But if you take away anything from this talk, please just take away this one thing, because I rely on this phrase in any situation. Never give up, because there is always another option. Ta-da! Questions?
This is a completely hypothetical question. No way related to that. What you said, not to make things personal. What do you do if somebody that you need their help makes it personal when you ask for their help, and B, how do you like recover the situation to make it not personal again?
I think that comes down a lot to strategy. So in the first place, if you've rehearsed all of this and prepared, then hopefully you know that you have prepared wording that sounds really non-confrontational. So for instance, I always say, in my opinion, whenever it's an opinion. And that way you can't accuse someone of anything. And then the other one is just, again, keeping it factual. If you keep reminding someone that something is factual, a situation happened, it resulted in this, they can't argue with that. You can't take that personally. But if they do take it personally, because some people are like that, then that's the kind of thing where either you try someone else if you can, and if you can't, then it's one of those things where either you do talk to them about it and say, look, it's not about you, or you walk away. Eventually. Any other questions? Yes.
Well, where do you work?
I work at Rocket Makers, but these problems have cropped up in the past few years across all of my career experience and some of my training before that. And where I work actually aligns a lot more closely with my preferences, my priorities. So I don't have most of the problems which are a big deal to me, but other people might find some of the problems that are bigger deals.
So it's all right where you work at the moment.
Yeah. I think everywhere I've worked has been amazing. And like I said, I've loved every organization I've worked with. But it's just about what you need. Some people, they can just work and they don't have to love what they're doing. And other people just aren't like that. They need to love what they're doing. They don't really care whether they're getting paid enough. And it's the same for everything. So, yeah, I've got what I want, or I'm getting it with these tips. Anyone else? Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great.